just going to run through the absolute value function. So I'll just draw a curve here. So that we call that curve y equals f of x. Now, if from y equals f of x, I now want to draw this absolute value function, y equals the absolute value of x. This is actually like affecting the y. Now, when you think about this, that's going to be y equals f of x and y equals minus f of x. Because what's inside here, this f of x inside here, could be positive or it could be negative. So the f of x could be positive f of x or it could be negative f of x. So if you're drawing positive and negative of that graph, what's already there, that's the positive of that graph, that's y equals f of x. The negative of that graph would be the same thing, just flipped like that. Now, there is one restriction on this graph, and that's the same restriction that is on all absolute value graphs. Once I take the absolute value of this function that I've just drawn, you notice that the y value here, the y value will always be equal to an absolute value. So the y value will always be positive. So if you think about that just with like an actual, if you had actual values, so the y value is always positive. So because the y value is always positive, that also means that the curve only exists above the x-axis. So that means that when you are sketching this, that the function then will only be this part of the graph and that part of the graph, okay? Because you need to rub out anything that is below the x-axis. Now, why that happens is because if you think about it, if you put in like a negative value, like say I put in a value like this down here, say it was f of x equal to minus 2, all right, then when you absolute value that minus 2, the y value will be positive. So any negative values like down here, they end up being positive. So what actually happens here, well, if you want to sketch y equals the absolute value of f of x, step 1 is you need to sketch f of x. So you sketch that. Step 2 is you sketch minus f of x. And step 3, then you rub out below the x-axis. Okay, so let's just apply that to a graph. So let's put one in. There's one there. You draw it like that. So it's minus 2, and that's, say, 2. Okay, so step 1. Step 1, that's y equals f of x. Then you draw y equals minus f of x. So it's the same thing, it's just flipped in the x-axis. And then the final and last step is anything that is below the axis you rub out. So your resulting curve actually looks like, with this all rubbed out, it's like a, looks a bit like that, which looks a bit like a dinosaur in a way, doesn't it? Okay. So let's apply those steps. I'll keep the steps there. We're going to apply it to another graph. Do one more. Okay. So let's do this. Do that, and then I'll do it back up like that. Okay, so step 1 is to draw minus f of x. So I've got f of x, that's the top, the red one, and then minus f of x. And then the final step is to rub out what's below it, which is this here. And that's what your new curve will look like. Okay, one more time. So draw a number plane. Let's put a curve on there. Let's see, let's draw, I'm going to draw something that just like that. Okay, step 1, draw minus of that. Step 2, rub the curve out that is below the x-axis. And then your final curve is y equals the absolute value of f of x. Okay, so one more time. Just do it like that. That's f of x. Okay, now draw this. Minus f of x. And then rub out what's below. And this resulting curve in red, that would be y equals the absolute value of f of x.